So we have been doing the fourth book, the book of birth and quest, almost for 4 months, starting from 2nd April, and last time we saw the last part of the book. So what we could do now is kind of quickly run through the book and try to link up the threads, join the threads together and see how the story, how the narrative develops and to what point it takes us. Now, the book of birth and quest is a book which was written by Shebendro at one time at a very early stage itself of the Savitri draft. But before that, let me tell you a few points about the statistics of this book. There are, of course, in this book 4 cantos: the birth and childhood of the flame, the growth of the flame, the call to the quest, and the quest. These are the 4 cantos of the book. In the first canto, the birth and childhood of the flame, there are 2 sections, and the number of sentences in each section is, in the first section, we have got 33 sentences. In the second, we have 50 sentences. In other words, in the first canto, there are in all 83 sentences. In the second canto, the growth of the flame, there are 3 sections, and the number of sentences in each section is 40, 12, and 13. So the total number of sentences again in the second canto is 65. In the third canto, the call to the quest, there is only 1 section actually, and the total number of sentences in that section is 63. And in the last canto, the quest, there are 2 sections and the total number of sentences is 62 in the last section, last canto. So we have got therefore 83, 65, 63, 62 sentences in each canto, which is more or less, I will say, kind of equal division of the number of sentences. So in all, in these 4 cantos, or in this 4th book, there are 273 sentences. The book consists of 273 sentences. Now, in a very early letter in 1936, Shebendro writes something about this book. This letter addressed to Amal Kiran in 1936. He says, the first 5 books, he is talking about the status of Savitri, the epic Savitri, as it stood in 1936. It was not in the manner in which we see it here. There were basically 2 major parts in that, and he says in the first part there are 5 books. The first 5 books of that part 1 of that 1936 draft of Savitri. The number of books are like this. The Book of Birth, that itself stands as a complete book, the Book of Birth. Then the Book of Quest. In other words, what we have here, Birth and Quest, as a single book in 1936, it was divided into two parts. It existed in two parts, the Book of Birth and the Book of Quest. Then, of course, after the Book of Quest, the Book of Love, the Book of Fate, and the Book of Death. That is how the composition stood in 1936 as far as this part is concerned. The Book of Birth, the Book of Quest, the Book of Love, the Book of Fate, and the Book of Death. Now, at that time, in 1936, there did not exist what we have now here, the second book, the book of the traveler of the world. The various planes of consciousness which are described in the second book of the present version, in the last version, that did not exist in 1936. He says there was no climbing of planes at that time. Those 14 cantos which are there, they did not exist at that time. Savitri moved through worlds of night, of twilight, and of day. That is what I got the last part of it, so to say. Savitri moved through worlds of night, of twilight, of day, and ended by calling down the power of the highest world of Sachidananda. Savitri moved through night, twilight, day, and she is calling down the powers of Sachidananda upon the earth. That is, calling down the power of the highest world of Sachidananda, that corresponds to the book of Everlasting Day, or book 11 in the present text here, you see. So that is how it stood in 1936 in terms of the scheme of the epic. In fact, later on the scheme of the epic also got completely modified, completely altered. Not completely, but considerably, I will say. And of course, the expansion of the theme was enormous after that. What we have here in 1936 are kind of small passages here and there and things like that, small narratives at different places, but not the manner in which we see it here. That thing came after 1936. In fact, I will say much of the work which you see here belongs to the period from 1936 to 1944 in his own handwriting, Sri Aurobindo, 1936, 1937 roughly you can say, to 1946. All of them came in his own handwriting, and he kept on revising and redrafting many of these things, kept on adding lines after lines, canto after canto, like that. This is what happened during those 6-7 years. Then, after 1944, he of course had the help of Nurul as his scribe, and then he started dictating. So that is another phase of composition of Savitri. But basically, essentially, as far as this particular book is concerned, the Book of Birth and Quest, we have here in a letter written by Sri Aurobindo in 1946, again to Amal Kiran. He writes to Amal Kiran in 1946. At that time, Amal Kiran was in Bombay, so they used to correspond with each other through postal letters, you see. So it's a very long letter, and in that letter, Sri Aurobindo says that the Book of Birth and Quest and the Book of Love have been completed. So you can see that basically the final form of the Book of Birth and Quest was arrived around 1945. So that is the date of composition of the Book of Birth and Quest, or the fourth book of Savitri. Now, in his brief background, Nirodbaran writes about this book in his 12 years with Sri Aurobindo. He says that what Nirodbaran writes, Book 4, the Book of Birth and Quest, is fairly revised by Sri Aurobindo. When he became the scribe, at that time, it was fairly revised by Sri Aurobindo himself. Is fairly revised by Sri Aurobindo. Several versions before the end of 1938 have been worked upon while he is coming to that point. These versions are expansions of much older drafts, much before 1938. Means you are writing some passages here, some passages there at different times, different periods. These versions are expansions of much older drafts, one of them possibly dating back to Baroda. He says it could have been perhaps drafted even when he was in Baroda. Now, there is of course no confirmation about this one, because if Sri Aurobindo had written anything in Baroda about Savitri, that draft does not exist. That draft is not available. And what we can say is that the earliest written draft of Savitri belongs to the earlier period, from 1916 to 1918. That is the first draft of Savitri which is available to us, and 1916 to 1918. But he also says in one of his letters in the 1930s that he had taken up the writing of Savitri long before the mother's arrival. Long before the mother's arrival. Now that long before, of course, does not mean in 1920, because that is not really long before that way, and he did not really write much about that. Long before could easily mean before her coming to Pondicherry for the first time in 1914. So possibly he did write Savitri in some form during his Baroda period. And to that extent, to that effect, it is also a statement by one who was staying with Sri Aurobindo in Baroda, Dinendranath Roy. He was staying in Baroda with Sri Aurobindo to help Sri Aurobindo to speak Bengali in a Bengali way. It was for that purpose Dinendranath Roy stayed with Sri Aurobindo in Baroda. And in his memoirs, in his notes, he says that Sri Aurobindo had written something about Savitri at that time. That draft does not exist, but he has mentioned that thing. Now, this draft is not, the existence of this draft is not accepted at all by the archives people. They say that it does not exist. We have no basis to assume that he did write anything about Savitri before he came to Calcutta. But that is another story. So as far as the Book of Birth and Quest is concerned, we can say that small passages here and there were present in different places, in different contexts, till 1938, when Shabanu started writing systematically Savitri as a full epic after 1938, then we can say that the book of birth and quest, along with the book of love, was completed by him by 1945. So we can say that this book belongs to the period 1945. In fact, I would rather go by one simple way of looking at things, that Savitri is a work which was really taken up by Shabanu during the last 12 years of his being here. So we can say that after the accident, after he had completed the revision of the Life Divine in 1939-1940, he took up Savitri most intensively. So the last decade is the period where the final Savitri is present. And Book of Birth and Quest, as we are here, belongs to that period you see here. Now that is the little historical background about the composition of Savitri. Now let us see how the theme develops in Savitri. Rather, instead of saying theme develop, let us pick up certain key phrases from various cantos and see what they really convey, to what extent we can grasp the significance of those key phrases. That is what we can see while we are surveying it. Now, Savitri, the first canto itself, as you know, it is named The Birth and Childhood of the Flame. That is the opening canto. The opening canto of Book of Birth. 93, section 93.1, right at the beginning. Now this is important. The birth and childhood of the flame. It has deep spiritual connotations. Normally, when we talk of the flame, we refer to it as a psychic being. That is the psychic flame, you see. Psychic flame. So it is that which is going to take birth and which is going to grow. But at the same time, we have to understand that psychic being does not really take birth. It is immortal. It moves, you might say, from birth to birth in its evolutionary progress to carry out the alchemic transformation of nature. It goes through several births. So, when he says birth of the flame, it could also mean the very first appearance of Savitri upon earth. Upon earth. As the mother says, since the beginning of the earth, whenever and wherever there was a possibility of the manifestation of the ray of the Supreme, I was there since the beginning. Now, that birth of the flame refers to that since the beginning. It refers to that since the beginning. That is the birth of Savitri. And her childhood is the growth through several lives. And that is what we see also in the description of the book. how the psychic brain really grows. That is, if you associate flame with psychic being Agni, the immortal in the mortal, that is the flame. The immortal in the mortal, that is Agni. So that is the appearance of Agni in this evolutionary creation. Now what that also means is, if we go again by the mother's revelation, that since the beginning of the earth, whenever etc. was there, means her coming here, her having the psychic being, is right from the beginning of the earth, which also means that it coincides with the birth of the earth itself. Earth's psychic being, and Savitri's psychic being, they appeared together simultaneously in this creation. And it is from that point onward evolution starts. Evolution starts from that point onward. Without the psychic being, there is no evolution. So that is the connotation, if we can understand that way, of the birth of the flame. Now, going in a slightly different direction, associating this development with the kind of narratives we have in the ancient scriptures, we can say that the birth of Savitri is in response to the tapasya of Ashwapati. He is carrying the world's desire to the Supreme and invoking her to come here and take mortal birth. Ashwapati, in the story of the Mahabharata, is issueless and he is concerned about the welfare of the society, and therefore he engages himself in yajna, in worshipping the fire, Agni, and for 18 years he offers oblations to Agni, ahutis as we call them, for 18 years, starting from early in the morning till late in the evening, constantly for 18 years, taking very little food once in a day and constantly praying. That is the kind of a tapasya, that is the kind of a yoga of the ancient days, when for spiritual growth they used to offer their prayers by offering something to fire, to Agni, the mystic fire. At the end of the 18-year period, Goddess Savitri, the divine Savitri, she appears in the fireplace, in the fire altar, Yajna Kunda. She appears in the Yajna Kunda, flaming there. She comes there, and it is that flame, Yajna Kunda, which grants a boon to Ashwapati. She says, yes, your wish will be fulfilled. I got sanction from the Lord Creator Himself, and with His sanction, I am granting you the boon of a daughter from the Yajna Kunda, from the flame, the altar flame. She is speaking to Ashwapati, and she says, one shall descend. Yes, you are praying for that. I heard your prayer. One shall descend. and change things here. That one shall descend, obviously it is she who herself is going to take the mortal birth.